The envelope was still on the kitchen table where my father had left it. I didn't open it right away. I just stood in the doorway of his house, my brother's house now, technically, with my coat still on and my keys still in my hand, staring at my name written in his careful, slanted handwriting. Claire. That was all. Just my name, like he'd known exactly who would be standing here, exactly like this, at exactly this moment. My brother Marcus was already talking. The lawyer said it's all pretty straightforward, he said from somewhere behind me. He was pouring himself coffee like this was a Tuesday morning and not the day we buried our father. The house, the investment accounts, the lake property, it's handled. I turned around. And the shop? He looked at me over the rim of his mug. Dad left you the shop. I waited for the rest. There was no rest. That's it, I said. Claire. He set the mug down with a small, careful click. The shop hasn't turned a profit in 6 years. You know that. Dad knew that. It's basically a liability at this point. I had the accountant look at it last spring, and honestly, the kindest thing would be to sell the property and... He left me the shop, I said again, because I needed to hear it out loud one more time. Marcus had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Then it passed. Look, I know it doesn't feel fair, but you were gone for 4 years, Claire. 4 years. I was here. I handled Mom's doctors, I handled Dad's medications, I drove him to every single appointment after his hip surgery. I was here. He picked up his coffee again. The house, the accounts, that reflects that. The shop is still something, it's still land. I looked at my brother. His pressed shirt, his easy confidence, the way he stood in our father's kitchen like he'd always owned it, and I didn't say anything. I picked up the envelope with my name on it and I walked out. The shop was a 40-minute drive outside of town, on a county road that most people only used to get somewhere else. Miller and Daughters Auto Repair. My grandfather had built it. My father had kept it running through 3 recessions and a flood. I had spent every summer of my childhood handing my dad tools I couldn't name, learning the names anyway because he believed you should understand the things that kept you moving. I hadn't been back in 4 years. The sign was weathered. The parking lot had a crack running diagonal across it that hadn't been there before. One of the bay doors was stuck halfway up, and I had to duck under it to get inside. The smell hit me before anything else. Oil and rubber and something metallic underneath. The specific smell of that specific place. And for a second, I was 12 years old again, and my dad was showing me how to check tire pressure and telling me that knowing how to take care of things was the same as knowing how to take care of yourself. I stood in the middle of the shop and I let myself feel it just for a minute. The grief I hadn't been able to touch at the funeral, surrounded by Marcus's colleagues and my dad's poker friends and neighbors I hadn't seen in years. I stood in the empty shop and I let it move through me like weather. Then I wiped my face and opened the envelope. Inside was a single key, small, old, brass. The kind that didn't look like it opened anything, a locksmith had made in the last 30 years, and a folded piece of paper. My father's handwriting again, the same careful slant. Back office, bottom drawer, left side, push it all the way to the back. That was it. No explanation, no letter. Just an instruction, written in the handwriting of a man who fixed things and believed in doing it right the first time. I found the back office the way I remembered it, small, crowded with binders and old receipts, a desk that had probably been there since my grandfather's time. The chair still had the same crack in the vinyl, patched with electrical tape. I sat down in it and opened the bottom left drawer, files, old invoices, a broken stapler. I pushed everything to the back, the way he'd written. My fingers found the edge of something, a panel, a seam in the wood. I pressed it, and it gave, tilting up on a simple hinge. Behind it was a small compartment, no bigger than a shoebox, built into the back of the drawer. Inside was a notebook. I almost didn't open it that night. It felt like something I needed to prepare for, but I sat in my father's old chair in my father's old shop, and the wind pushed against the corrugated walls and I opened it. It wasn't a journal exactly. It was more like a record. My father's handwriting again and again across 20 or 30 pages. Dates going back 9 years. Numbers. Property assessments. Maps, hand-drawn, of parcels of land marked with small notations I didn't immediately understand. And then, near the middle of the notebook, a section titled in underlined capitals, FOR Slayer. I stopped breathing for a moment. "You always thought I was hard on you," it started. "I wasn't. I was hard on you because you could take it and still come out standing, and I knew it before you did. Your brother is a good man and I love him. But he loves comfort. You love the work itself. Those are different things. The shop looks like nothing." I know. I let it look like nothing. The back 2 acres are zoned commercial. I had it reclassified in 2019. Quietly, didn't tell anyone, didn't make any moves because the timing wasn't right. There are offers from 3 developers in the folder behind this notebook. The lowest one is $400,000. That was 2 years ago. The land value since then, with the new highway bypass route confirmed, has likely doubled. Call Raymond Ash at Ash & Partners. He's been holding paperwork for you. He knows to wait for you specifically. Don't sell it because you're tired. Don't sell it because you're tired. Don't sell it because Marcus tells you to. Don't sell it at all unless you've decided what you actually want, and only you know what that is. I left you the thing that takes work to understand because you're the only one who would do that work. I love you. I was proud of you every day, even when I didn't say it. Especially the days I didn't say it. Dad, I sat in that chair for a very long time. I called Raymond Ash the next morning. He answered on the second ring like he'd been waiting, and maybe he had. "Ms. Miller," he said, "I'm glad you found it. Your father was very specific about how this should go." "How long have you been holding this?" I asked. "Since February of last year," he said. "He came to me after his diagnosis. He had a very clear picture of what he wanted. The diagnosis. 14 months before he died, and he'd spent that time quietly, methodically building a system to make sure I didn't walk away with nothing. Not a conversation, not a confrontation with Marcus. Just careful, deliberate preparation, the same way he'd approached every repair job I'd ever watched him do. Assess the problem. Get the right tools. Do it right the first time. Raymond told me the current offers. The lowest was $900,000. There were 2 others. I thanked him and told him I'd be in touch, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of a gas station outside of town, and I stared at the steering wheel for a while. Marcus called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. He called again an hour later, and I answered. "The lawyer mentioned you'd been in contact with someone named Ash," he said. His voice was different, not angry exactly. Tight. "Raymond Ash? Yes," I said. "He's been managing some paperwork for Dad." A pause. "What kind of paperwork?" "Property documents, mostly." Another pause, longer. "Claire, the shop was assessed at $40,000. I had it looked at." "You had the building looked at," I said. "Dad had the land reclassified 3 years ago. The back 2 acres are zoned commercial. There's a highway bypass coming through the county. The land alone is worth." "What?" The word came out flat. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence do its own work. "He never told me," Marcus said. His voice had shifted into something I didn't hear very often from him. Something smaller. "He never told me any of that." "I know," I said. "You're saying he knew the whole time. The whole time when he was doing the will, he knew. He knew." I heard my brother breathing. In and out, slow, processing the architecture of a decision our father had made and not explained. Why didn't he just... Marcus started, then stopped. "Because you would have argued with him," I said. And I kept my voice quiet when I said it, no sharpness in it. "You would have made a case, and you're good at that, and he didn't want to spend his last months fighting. He just made his decision, and he left it for me to find. That's," Marcus made a sound I couldn't classify. "That's incredibly unfair." "To who?" I asked. He didn't answer. I let it sit there between us, not to punish him, but because it was a question worth sitting with. He'd had the house and the accounts and the comfort of knowing for months that things had gone the way he'd expected them to go. My father had handed him certainty. He'd handed me the thing that required work. Which of us had been given more? I'm not going to shut you out, I said finally. If I sell the land or develop it or whatever I decide to do, I'm not going to do it to hurt you. That's not the point. Then what is the point? His voice was tired now. I think the point was that he wanted me to know, I said, that he saw it, even when he didn't say it. I sobbed. That he saw it, even when he didn't say it. That's worth more than the land, honestly. But the land isn't bad either. Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was hard to tell. I drove back out to the shop that evening. I sat in the parking lot with the engine off and watched the light change across the old signage, the way the late sun turned the rust on the lettering something close to gold. Miller and Daughters. My grandfather had put daughters in there because he'd had 3 of them and no sons, and he'd said that was better anyway. My dad had kept the name because he thought the same thing. I'd spent 4 years building someone else's systems, working in operations management for a logistics company that paid well and asked a lot, and didn't care particularly who I was as long as the numbers moved the right direction. I was good at it. I wasn't proud of it. Those are different things, my father had written. And I understood now that he'd been telling me something larger than he'd ever said out loud. I thought about what it would mean to stay, to make a decision, to choose the work itself instead of the comfort of not having to choose. Inside the office, the notebook was still on the desk where I'd left it. I'd read it 3 times by then. I'd memorized the numbers, the assessments, the names and contact information my father had collected in his careful, slanted handwriting. He'd built me a map. He'd just known I was the one who would read it. I opened my phone and called Raymond Ash again. I'm not selling, I told him. Not yet. I want to understand what we actually have before we do anything with it. That's exactly what your father thought you'd say, Raymond said. There was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. He told me to tell you if that was your answer. He told me to tell you, good girl. He said you'd know what it meant. I did know. When I was 9, I'd rebuilt my first carburetor under his supervision. It had taken me 3 hours and I'd gotten grease on my jeans and cried twice and gotten it wrong the first time and right the second time. When I finally got the engine to turn over, he hadn't cheered or made a big production of it. He just looked at me and said, good girl, in the same tone he used when a repair held up after a difficult job, the tone that meant that was real and it mattered, and I saw it. I'd spent 30 years wanting to hear that again. I sat in my father's chair, in my father's shop, with the weight of his notebook in my hands, and I thought about Marcus going home to a house that was already his, already comfortable, already finished. And I thought about myself here, with a cracked parking lot and a stuck bay door and 2 acres of land that were worth more than anyone had thought to look for, and a notebook full of my father's faith in my willingness to do the work. It wasn't the same inheritance. It was a better one. I saw Marcus 2 weeks later, at a dinner our aunt organized on the premise of keeping the family together in the months after loss. He was quieter than usual. He looked at me differently. Not badly, just with an assessment behind his eyes that hadn't been there before, or maybe had always been there and I'd never noticed it pointing in my direction. After dinner, he found me on the back porch. I want to understand what you're doing with it, he said. No preamble. He'd always been efficient. I'm not asking for a cut, He stopped. Restarted. I want to understand. So I told him, the rezoning, the bypass route, the offers Raymond had been holding, what I was thinking about, the possibility of development versus a long-term lease structure, the different timelines. I talked to him the way my dad had talked to me, not dumbing it down, not protecting him from complexity, just giving him the information and trusting him to do something useful with it. He listened. He didn't interrupt, which was new. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, I didn't know about any of it. I know, I said. I thought I was being fair, he said. When I talked to you at the house, I thought I was being accurate. I know that too. He nodded, looking out at the yard. The same yard we'd grown up in. The big oak tree our dad had climbed when we were kids, held the rope swing off, called up to us to let go. Trust it, you won't fall. He was always harder on you, Marcus said. Yes, I said. I thought that meant he worried about you more. I thought about that. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it meant he expected more. I used to think those were the same thing. I don't think so anymore. Marcus turned to look at me. What are you going to do with the shop itself? The building? Fix it, I said. He raised his eyebrows. The bay door sticks, I said. The crack in the lot needs to be repaired before winter or it'll get worse. The sign could use some work. And the back office. I paused. I want to keep the back office the way it is. For now. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. Then, quietly, he would have loved that. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice entirely, so I didn't push it further. We stood there on the porch for a while, brother and sister, neither of us talking. Both of us doing the kind of accounting that doesn't show up on any balance sheet, weighing what had been given and what had been withheld and what the difference between those two things actually means when the person who made all the decisions is gone and all you have left is what they chose to leave behind. My father had left Marcus everything that was already finished. He'd left me everything that still needed work. I have always been better with the things that need work. I didn't destroy my brother. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters how you move through moments like this. I could have laid out every number, every document, every carefully assembled fact in front of the entire family at the dinner table with everyone watching and let Marcus spend the rest of the season answering for the confidence with which he'd looked at me and said it's basically a liability. I had thought about it. I won't pretend I hadn't, but that wasn't what my father had built. He hadn't left me a weapon. He'd left me a foundation. Something to build from. Something that required me to know what I wanted before I decided what to do with it. Using it to flatten Marcus would have been like using a level to break a window. Wrong tool. Wrong job. Wrong version of who I wanted to be. So instead, I called him. I kept calling him. I sent him the rezoning documents when I finally pulled them myself, just so he'd have them. When the first serious developer came out to walk the land, I brought Marcus along, not because he had a claim, but because he's my brother, and I don't want to live in a family where information is a territory you defend. I don't know if that's generosity or pragmatism. My father would probably say they're the same thing, if they both get the job done. The bay door is fixed now. I did it myself. A Saturday morning in early November with a YouTube tutorial and a new spring mechanism and a great deal of swearing that I'd prefer not to repeat. When it finally rolled up smooth and clean and right, the way a door is supposed to move, I stood in the opening for a minute with the cold air coming in and thought about my dad watching me cry over a carburetor, waiting, not rescuing, knowing I'd get there. Good girl. I got there, Dad. I got there.